Hey Sun Space Sun! I'm Daisy Viktoria, and welcome to another medieval adventure. Today we're going a bit cruel. I mean, Cruella. Have you seen the new Cruella movie? Because if not, get thee to the theater! But you are not required to have already seen the movie in order to enjoy this costuming adventure. I love a good fashion icon. In this case, it's Cruella. And you know who also loved good fashion? Medieval people. The 15th century, in particular, was a time of fashion innovation. So when I decided I wanted to put Cruella in another time period, the 15th century was absolutely perfect. Add to that, they really like to wear furs during this time period, and one particular fur has a sort of spotted, let's say, look that might make one think of Dalmatians. Okay, so let's dive into this. First of all, I loved the new Cruella movie. I thought the way they fleshed out the story and Cruella's background was really interesting. But most of all, I love the costumes. I mean, can we just take a moment to appreciate the phenomenal work done on those? Oh my goodness, so good and so imaginative. In fact, the entire movie was just so visually stunning, and I am a sucker for that. Cruella's character has always been centered around her desire to be fashionable, and I really love the way the movie made her artistic vision a part of her very being. That's why I knew that if I took Cruella to another era, I had to take her someplace where fashion was forefront, and it had to be somewhere she could really display her style and make a statement for herself. So fast forward, or rewind, I guess, to the 15th century. Coming into this era, we already saw a lot of fashion innovation kind of speeding up throughout the 14th century in Europe, especially during the later portion. So we're really ramping up for a fashion revolution here. And the coming years did not disappoint. Fashion changed very quickly and elaborately throughout the 15th century, and this was really a time when you could wear your wealth and your status in your clothing. And showing status through clothing is something that a fashion icon might do throughout the ages, including in Cruella's time. Wherever we set her, that's paramount. I chose to place Cruella in the 1430s because I really thought the styles from this decade would lend themselves well to the way that I wanted to represent Cruella, and I thought they would lend themselves well to merging the period with the classic look we know of Cruella's character. In these examples, we see a few important things. An outer gown belted at the waist or the underbust, some type of collar attached to the gown, very big sleeves, fur linings, and this headpiece featuring a padded roll and hairnets known as crispinets. I really like that the hair is visible in this headpiece style because a very important part of Cruella's character design is her black and white hair. A houppelande is a garment we see with some variations in the 15th century. It's an outer gown worn over a more fitted kirtle, which is a garment we saw frequently throughout the century leading up to this. The houppelande comes in later as another style worn over that kirtle. A houppelande is a unisex garment, so in period artwork, there are versions of houppelande worn by both men and women. Here are a few examples of both, so you can see a lot of similarities. Women's garments are full length, while men's garments can be full length or they can be shorter. A houppelande is characterized by being a loose outer garment which is belted generally at the waist or the underbust. And a houppelande has big voluminous sleeves. There are different collars found on these garments. Some are quite tall, some are smaller. Another variation of the houppelande is a gown worn specifically in the Burgundian region, what we know as the Netherlands or the Low Countries. This is very similar, but typically has fitted sleeves. And because there are a few variations of this style, well, they're all sort of the same base garment. I do have some design choices and variations outlined in the PDF tutorial I have for creating this garment. What's that? A PDF tutorial? That's right! I put together a document that can help you create your very own houppelande, starting with your measurements, which you then apply to my diagrams, so that the pieces are perfectly fitted to your size and proportions. The PDF takes you all the way through the construction steps of the garment. I also have some notes in there on which style variations are easier and which ones are more challenging to help you decide where you want to start with your project and maybe how you want to progress trying some different variations. For my Cruella dress, I really wanted to choose something that reads high fashion, innovation, style, and of course is able to integrate historical elements with what we now know today as Cruella. Basically, I wanted a medieval garment that very clearly reads Cruella without needing an explanation. Important things here are the color scheme, the fur, and the lavish display. I'm creating a pretty standard Houppelande base garment with a very tall collar and large sleeves. I knew that I wanted a black textured material, a fur lining, and red details for my gown. Many of these garments in period were made of wool, and I ended up going with a thinner wool, which is actually blended with rayon. That was to save a bit of money on the materials, and I feel the rayon blend adds to the drape without taking away the wool quality. In the 15th century, wool was quite common as a lining for these garments. And that makes sense because they were worn in Europe where it was very cold. A wealthy person might be able to have ermine fur. Ermines are these super cute weasels that are mostly white with a little black spot on the end of their tails. Ermine fur was created by sewing lots of ermine pelts together, so that's why you get in a lot of these medieval images what looks like white fur with black spots. It's actually many pelts sewn together. I'm using a faux fur that mimics ermine, and I really like this one that's not quite equally spaced because I think it looks really realistic. It has depth and texture, and it also brings in some of that Dalmation influence. By the way, special shout out to Kayla from McNerdy Costumes and Props, who helped me find these fabrics online. She didn't even know she was actually working with me on a collab, so surprise! Without further ado, let's make this thing. Here's the initial sketch that I did for the dress. This was actually before I decided to make the collar stand up. This gives me a good idea of what I'm doing and sort of like an overall view. Here I am cutting out that beautiful wool fabric. This is a lightweight wool blended with rayon, and it's really, really nice. It's a black wool fabric, but then it's got all this white texture in it, so I think it looks really, really cool. I measured out a train for the back of the dress, so the back is longer than the front. Many Houppelandes in period artwork have trains, and it seems like a very fashionable detail to add to one's gown. I cut out all the body pieces and the sleeve pieces from this beautiful wool fabric. I sewed all of these pieces together by sewing machine. The collar is cut as part of the body pieces, and then there's a gore attached in the back to give it a little bit more volume. This is the more advanced collar option from my tutorial. The other ones are actually a little bit easier than this one. I had to do some fitting to make sure that the collar was the correct height and width and that it looked the way I wanted it to. And I ended up being really happy with it. So here's the dress in the process of being sewn together. It's quite a big garment, very voluminous. There are also gores inserted into the side of this dress. That is an optional detail, so when you're making a Houppelande, you don't have to set gores into the sides. It's kind of like how big, how voluminous do you want it? For me, the gores allowed me to have the volume that I wanted for this particular gown. I have also made Houppelandes in the past without gores, but for this particular gown, the fabric I used and the way that I cut it out, the gores helped me to achieve extra fullness at the hem, which is what I was after. Okay, so now we're getting to a really fun part. Fun as in challenging and weird. I want to line this Houppelande in fake fur, but I'm not going to line the whole thing. I'm just going to line the parts that show, so the inside of the collar as well as the sleeves. Now I thought to myself, I could cut all of the same body pieces out of that fake fur just on the collar part, but that's a lot of seams in the fake fur, and I probably don't need to, because without having to fit the rest of the body, I can probably drape just a collar lining. So that's what I did. So basically, I traced out the upper edge of my collar, and then I figured out how to make that into a separate piece where it only had a seam in the back and not all those extra seams like at the shoulders and the gore. And here I am trying on the gown. I think it looks so good. I'm so excited about this. Oh my gosh, wow. I love it so much. Okay, back to work on the collar, a little more draping. Basically, I draped half of the pattern here on the mannequin after I traced it out, and I just tried to make sure that everything lined up and it looked pretty good. Before attaching the fake fur lining, I realized that I needed something to hold the collar upright. I spent some time futzing with this collar and trying to figure out how I would create the structure to make it stand upright, because obviously it wants to fall down due to gravity. After a few attempts at making the collar stand up, I finally went with boning. These are my boning channels sewn into the garment. And I sewed it all down by machine. You can't even tell because the fabric has such a cool texture. So finally, with that structure ready to go, it's time to cut out the fake fur. Now, when you cut fake fur, there's this nap on the side, so all those fur pieces, and you don't want to cut them off. You want to let them be long, so you want to cut as close as possible to just the backing of the fabric. And then I sewed the collar lining pieces together, and I just had to do that in one seam in the back because I was able to drape the collar, yay. I sewed that together by hand, so that way I would have control over getting a really nice finish, and also I could sew just the backing material and not catch all the fur fibers in the seam. Here's more of my fake ermine fur laid out on the floor, because you know what, while we're working with this fur, let's start doing the sleeves. By the way, you're getting a sneak peek at my new sewing room. It's actually not even decorated yet. Right there on the floor is some of the decor that I intend to put up on the walls, but Cruella had to happen, so, you know, priorities. The sleeve linings are just for the bottom of the sleeves, so that way the part that you see will be lined, but it doesn't need to go all the way up throughout the sleeve. If you are using my tutorial to make your own houppelande, the sleeves I'm doing on this gown are the ones with the curved lower edge, not the pointed lower edge. That's something I wanted to experiment with here, and I really like the result. I think it's so lovely. You'll see the result soon. Sometimes you see period garments that have some type of cording or woven trim that is sort of around the edges of the garment, and that acts as a way to finish off the edges, and it's a detail that I've really come to enjoy. Also, the fake fur edges were kind of annoying, and I thought that a really good way to finish them off would be to add some sort of a detail corded trim there. I already had this corded trim, luckily. It's mostly black, and then it has red and gold details, so it goes perfectly with my color scheme for medieval Cruella. I'm basically just couching the cord onto the edge of the garment by sewing around the cord and catching it in the garment on both layers, the outer wool and the faux fur lining. For the sleeve lining, I did have to tack it down in a few places inside the sleeve so that way it doesn't like fall out. And then I hemmed the bottom of the dress, and here's the progress. I just felt like it looked so amazing once I had the fur added to it. Just like, oh my goodness, I'm so super excited here. Wow, this is oh my gosh. So this is technically a finished Houppelande garment. What it needs now are all the accessories that really bring it to life and make it look like the portraits. I'm using this beautiful red velvet to create my belt, and I have these gold metal filigree pieces that look a lot like what you see in the period artwork. The belt is pretty simple. It's basically a big rectangle that fits around my waist with enough ease to actually hook it together in the back. Since the velvet itself doesn't really have all that much body, it's kind of drapey, I decided to line the belt in canvas. So that gives it a nice structure. I measured and equally spaced all the gold metal filigrees, and then I sewed them all on by hand with thread that matches the belt. And then I have this cool gold metal filigree clasp. So we're getting somewhere with the belt. It's really starting to look like a Houppelande. Oh look, another rectangle of red velvet. I wonder what that could be. That's the padded roll worn on the head. To create this, I first sewed it into a tube and totally forgot that you can't turn things right side out if you don't leave a perimeter open. So I had to take that out and sew it into a tube first and then sew the tube together in the back. I realized that I didn't have any polyfill, and it's period appropriate to stuff things with scraps of fabric anyway. And I happen to have some really fluffy scraps here from the fake fur. So I actually stuffed my padded roll with all the little pieces I cut off the ends of the fake fur. Once the padded roll was stuffed, I could actually sew it together in the back. Most of these rolls in period images have some sort of decoration on them. So I used this gold cord that I have to wrap around the entire roll over and over. And then I also made a strand of pearls. For this, I'm actually using fake pearls. Notice it takes a lot of pearls. And I do have some real pearls that I'm using in this project, but I wanted to use the real pearls on the belt and in the hairnets and opted for fake pearls where I needed so very many of them. Here's my wig. This was super fun to make sure all the hairs were perfectly separated in the back. And now it's time for experiments with the hairnets or crispinets. I tried a lot of different methods to get these to work, and finally I got one together. So since there's two, I decided to make one work and then film the second one. And I will put more detailed picture instructions on how I did these crispinettes on Patreon. So if you guys are on my Patreon, you can go over there and those will be up soon. Basically, I'm creating these round structures using cording and gold silk fabric and making sure that I have an evenly spaced net sewn in there. And then I'm threading a cord through that fabric on the outside of each crispinet. And then everywhere that a piece of the net meets, I'm tying on a real pearl. And now the fun part, figuring out how to actually put them around the hair and make them stay up on the head. Because now basically everything is sewn and we're gonna get ready for the reveal. And darling, I'm so excited. I already had a red linen kirtle, which I'm using to wear underneath my houppelande, and I will go over all the layers of this outfit in the next video where I talk about getting dressed as a 15th century fashionable lady who happens to be Cruella. If you'd like to make your own houppelande, please follow the link below to get my PDF tutorial, which takes you through drafting your pattern using my diagram and your measurements, all the way through construction of the garment. You can even select style preferences. So there are a few different collar variations and also sleeve variations in the tutorial. And when you use my instructions, make sure you tag me on the social medias so I can share your photos. A special thank you to my patrons who help me continue to create amazing content like this. And as always, I appreciate all of you so very much. Find me on all the social medias. I'm Daisy Viktoria everywhere. My website is daisyviktoria.com. I hope you have a wonderful, magical day, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon. Bye-bye.